There you
Okay, we're
go.
we're recording because we just started talking about media we've been
Yeah.
watching.
Well, you were about to say something really uh a good observation.
Yeah, so at the time of this recording, I first want to point out that I at least watched this movie on the day that the Alex Consani won Model of the Year. She's the
Yeah.
first trans model to ever win Model of the Year,
Yeah.
which it feels notable to point out
Yeah.
considering today's topic. But
Uh,
what we were talking about right before recording was how if it seems like we're on the cusp of a new era of movie musicals, which just fully set me into my kind of annual spring awakening hyperfixation. It's been this whole thing for almost 10 years where every year I rediscover how good this show is.
I mean, I do that too. Except I was gonna say like every year for the last couple years I've watched Scream during Halloween, except I didn't do that this year, and I feel like I why didn't I do that? I need to watch Scream this year. I haven't watched Scream this year. But yeah, I mean you like I think I'm like, yeah, I'm a musical theater nerd, but I don't really like there's very few
I'm
shows
very
that I've
picky
actually.
though.
Yeah, but you like the
The
music when
shows I
you.
get into are the ones that I at least start with knowing that I'll probably like this.
Yeah, but you also like go like you think about it and like you seek out all the watching the different versions of it, and like I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, music's cool. I'll put some musical theater songs on my playlists and stuff.
The
Um
official recording is not that good to
no,
me because it feels very low energy.
yeah. Yeah, I actually know I never have finished listening to Spring Awakening. I can't remember. I'm assuming it was like I don't know. I know I tried to listen to the official sound recording of Spring Awakening, and I never finished it because it was like I don't get this. Um,
Yeah, and I was gonna say it's like simultaneously like relatively like radio friendly, quote unquote, in the sense that it doesn't sound like traditional musical music, but you can't also just casually listen to the soundtrack and expect to know what's going on because
yeah,
it's German expressionism. It's all of the songs are inner monologues. They're not furthering along the plot. So you
yeah,
have to find a slime tutorial.
yeah. You know, we have not covered enough musicals on this
Yeah.
podcast. And we're not fixing that today or this season, really, but we need to cover more musicals because that's like definitionally camp.
Yeah. And also tomorrow I'm doing my first teaching workshop as part of my media pedagogy class. And
Whoa!
it is predictably on camp.
That's so cool. What are you like what's the structure of the class gonna be? What are you gonna like have them watch, if anything?
So it's kind of split into three parts of firstly just either writing down or discussing with a group of people like different things you might consider camp, and then I'll show a couple of clips, one of them being like the opening from The Pirate, which is a musical. I'm also
Yeah.
showing one of the school scenes from Female Trouble and
Yeah.
the ending of Freeway. And we should really cover
Oh.
Freeway on this pod.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
And then the last section is just me handing out construction paper and magazines and go make a collage that you think is camp.
Oh,
And
that's
that's
so
it.
fun. Speaking of female trouble, I saw it last night in 35 millimeter at the Grand Illusion, of course, my beloved, and brought two friends who had never seen it. Actually, one of our friends writer of our show's theme song, Harrison Lurie. And he texted me yesterday being like, "So wait, what's this movie about? Like, is it happy? Is it sad? Like, what's the vibe?" And I'm like,
Well, sort of,
uh
kinda.
I'm like, it's weird. I was like, it's funny, but doesn't have a happy ending. Like, I was like,
Also,
it's
maybe doesn't
satire.
have a happy ending.
Uh, the person behind us, the audience member behind us when the movie wrapped up was like, "I think this is the saddest thing I've ever seen." And apparently, so there was another volunteer there and was telling our volunteer group chat that the person behind them kept going, "No, no, don't do that. Oh no." The whole film, which that volunteer found really funny and like made them enjoy the experience more actually.
I mean, I find
Um
that funny.
yeah. I I just, of course, seeing things in 35 millimeter make me appreciate like the color, and so like I feel like that's the thing that I keep thinking when I'm seeing these film prints of things. But yeah, that actually segue, film Female Trouble was shot on 60 millimeter, blew up to 35 millimeter. The film we're discussing today was also shot on 16 millimeter, at least according to a Letterboxd review I saw. I don't know if
I mean,
that's
it
what you
looks like it
saw.
was.
Yeah.
It has a look that I would associate with 16 millimeter from
Yeah.
what I've observed.
Yeah. Ugh, I need to I still haven't seen a 16 millimeter screening, but I need to do that. I feel like I've only ever seen 35 millimeter or like digital scans of 16 millimeter. But
Anyways,
anyways,
we're discussing an iconic film, an often written about and discussed film, a documentary.
yes, our documentary of the season, because
Yeah.
I think we should try to cover a documentary per season. Though I have an idea for a documentary to cover for a future season that is like kind of a documentary but also kind of not. So we'll see if that one
I
works.
think I
But
have an idea of what you're referring to based on that description.
you could cut this out, but I recommended Kamikaze Hearts.
That's exactly what I thought you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah,
we're
Paris is burning.
covering Paris is Burning from 1990, but shot in the late 80s.
Yeah. Had you seen this film before?
No, I had known a lot about it before
Yeah.
because of how iconic and famous it is, but I
Yeah.
hadn't gotten around to watching it fully.
Um, I watched it for the queer 90s class that I took. That's the class that I watched, but I'm a cheerleader for the first time. That was the class I watched Rocky, Living End for the first time. Like, and but I had heard about it a lot beforehand. And I feel like there's a couple of like filmmakers. There's one filmmaker particularly that I've talked to who's like in the circle of creatives in Seattle that I know, who like she cites Paris as Burning as like her inspiration for getting into documentary filmmaking. And obviously it's also very important for like the queer community. I kind of have opinions about
A
how
lot
this
of
works
people
as a
do.
documentary.
A lot of people do, famously.
I know I know that, and I'm glad that you've like read a couple sources and are bringing stuff, because I just like looked through Letterbox right after watching this and right before we started recording it, this discussion, and all of the every single Letterbox review was like, this means so much to me, like this is so like this you moved me, and I'm like, that is absolutely valid. You're speaking from your own experience, but like I don't know, something about this film the second time, like watching it like from a critical perspective and how it functions as a documentary frustrates me.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not alone in that. Like, I really liked it, but I can also very much see where the criticisms are coming from.
Yeah, because this is so the producer director Jenny Livingston.
Yeah.
Is that her last name? Okay.
Yeah.
Her background, she's a white female filmmaker, director from New York,
I think so.
but the scene, of course, is the
Yeah.
ballroom scene. And she was not from the ballroom scene.
Yeah, I feel like we should like explain the plot a bit more
Yeah.
before we start explaining why it's contested.
Yeah. A potential segue into the plot is that this is what you kind of called, and I'm sure other people have called this it before, is like it's kind of a spiritual sequel to The Queen,
Yeah.
which we covered in season one, because of course Crystal LaBeija, her big moment at the end of The Queen, criticizing the way those beauty pageants worked. Well, she went on to found House of LaBeija, which is one of the main mothers or like drag queens featured in Paris is Burning is Pepper LaBeija, who was the mother of House LaBeija at the time of the late 80s. And
Yeah.
she mentions Crystal being like, oh, you know, she was the founder.
Yeah, she arguably started the entire house system,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. But
And
yeah,
that,
her ascendant Pepper is one of the talking heads in the documentary.
yeah, the documentary Paris is Burning basically is like showing like, okay, here are these houses, which are basically families, they say, right? Like
Yeah.
these communities that come together, and the heads are caretakers of their queer found family. And they're also usually winners of balls. And that's the kind of main plot, I guess. If there's a plot to this film, it's about like all of these performers at these competitions that is a very different kind of competition than the beauty pageant and the Queen, because now it's
Yeah.
20 years later, right?
Yeah, and I think in one of the ways in which it's like a spiritual sequel is with the character of Dorian, since she is
Mm,
like very old guard and talking about like how it used to be and how it used to be very much inspired by like showgirls, and there was only like very limited categories, but now there's like we can see like many more categories, and there's also the house system, so it's not just
hmm.
like fully individualized.
Yeah. And probably to me, the most interesting part about this film, upon like watching this film for me this time, was I had in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is a film that is about, you know, if we're talking about camp, it's talking about gender. You know, it's these drag queens, but it's also these trans women, and it's, you know, all of these categories are playing with like gender expression. That's in my mind how I remembered this film. But watching it, I was like, oh, to me, it's much more about camping wealth.
Yeah, wealth and employment and arguably race.
Mm. Well, because wealth and privilege and like fame and fortune in America, it's that is tied to whiteness. And they say that. And it's so like that to me, I think I hadn't really I don't know, I hadn't really remembered the like or considered like that to be one of the takeaways of this film is like not so much the like I mean yes it is about queerness and gender and sexuality because all of that is all tied together, but like it's not just gender and sexuality, it's how race and how wealth and class and like job and financial stability, that is what is all tied together, and that is what is performed in balls.
Yeah, one of the sources I read from, which is like a WordPress blog, like directly addresses the camp of the like different categories, specifically like the categories of like going to school, which I love that category. I
Mm-hmm.
love that scene of like the category is going to school. Does she look like she's going to school?
Mm-hmm.
And there's also like the military
Oh yeah.
category.
Which I re-listened to parts of our episode on the Queen. That was an aspect of the Queen. One of the things that was like part of the beauty pageant of that was a kind of like a military like patriotic performance,
Yeah.
which is so interesting to me that that is another thing that is like another kind of category of like performance that is still being, I mean, it's still in the late 80s of this film, but I would say still today as well, is like it's a kind of like this, it's a way to kind of, I don't know, it's like making it your own, but a lot of it's a lot of like this performance, all these categories they talk about, it's passing, right? It's like,
Yeah.
can you in this space make it seem like you are straight, make it seem like you are successful, and like what is being judged is if someone passes you on the street they would actually believe
Yeah.
that that is your background.
To me, one of the most camp moments in this film is like when one of the runway walkers is like in just like this striped cardigan and jeans.
Mm.
And it's like because it's not like what the general idea of ballroom culture is, but like it's just this person like walking the runway or ballroom, as it were,
Mm.
in like a shirt and jeans. Like
Mm-hmm.
she looks like she's just going to the groceries. But
Yeah.
then there's like the crowd is cheering her on, and there's also the commentating on the outfit. I was like, wow.
The well-dressed men of the 80s get into the suits and get into the pumps.
In real life, you can't get a job as an executive unless you have the educational background and the opportunity. Now, the fact that you are not an executive is merely because of the social standing of life. That is just pure thing. Black people have a hard time getting anywhere. And those that do are usually straight. In a ballroom, you can be anything you want. You're not really an executive, but you're looking like an executive. And therefore, you're showing the straight world that I can be an executive. If I had the opportunity, I could be one, because I can look like one. And that is like a fulfillment. Your peers, your friends are telling you, oh, you'd make a wonderful executive.
Is this a businessman of the 80s or what?
Like it's almost as if it's not even the fashion or the performance of the model that is camp. It is the pageantry and celebration of that.
Yeah. Like we're cheering for this very much normal outfit that we see every day.
Mm-hmm. But to them, we might think that
Yeah.
that is normal. That is quote unquote
Yeah.
normal. No, that is the thing. It's like for the, they're like they're saying like this isn't this that isn't who the kind of, it is a performance for them, or that is like it is a category that they might not think that they could fit into, and so that's why
Yeah.
it is something that is being part of a show.
Yeah. One of the things the blog post said, and it's from the blog eatacrocodile.wordpress.
Amazing
It's fun.
name.
I like randomly found it searching Paris is burning documentary camp. And so they say camp behavior is a secret code affectation, the mark of a subculture that is recognizable to those who are members of it. Code switching and neutralizing one's pure campiness is therefore possible. To neutralize and unneutralize one's camp is not to undermine its validity, but rather to mark it as an aestheticism adopted by marginalized groups. To walk in a
Mm.
category as a soldier, a glamour model, a business executive is to demonstrate your competency for the role, which is an argument formulated along the axis of aestheticism. You could complete the role because you look like you could complete the role.
Yeah. That is like And they say
Yeah.
that there's like a quote that's like that from one of the talking heads during I think the executive realness portion where they say that that's such a powerful concept, I think, of like if you look it, you are it. And it's like just the aesthetics. The aesthetics become everything
Yeah,
about what an identity is.
I do think they also kind of say that like if it wasn't for our social position, we would be like this executive or
Yeah.
this student or this person in the military.
It kind of ends up being a really like I don't know, interesting critique of the social structures where it's like people get into the positions of power that they have because of honestly in many ways luck. If you were,
Yeah.
born white, you're born like if you were born a cishet white male from wealthy parents, you're gonna be an executive. And it's like, well, if someone doesn't have that same background, but could look and act exactly the same way, why don't they have that position? It's because of the society is set up to support the like status quo, I guess.
Yeah, and along those lines, the blog says, I could also argue then that walking in categories is an expression of loss. Through naming that loss is to be too serious. In the ballroom, it is therefore not executive realness, but executive realness. And the intensity of that which is undeniably fantasy is the subject of panel judgment.
Mm,
Like, even though a lot of the outfits are like quote unquote relatively normal, it's still very much an expression of like the classic things being what they're not in terms of the context that they create for it.
yeah. I mean, I think there's a line for the like the schoolgirl realness or schoolboy realness where it's like they're like, "Oh, they're going to school. They're going not here." And it's like, okay, so they're acting as if they're acting and looking like someone who would not be in the scenario that they are in. They're like they are there though. Like
Yeah. And like ballroom culture, like as the documentary explained, very much arises from basically a bunch of marginalized kids that were kicked out of their homes for their sexuality or gender identity,
yeah.
which also just kind of leads to dropping out of school.
Mhm.
And that's how you get the houses and the families
Yeah.
as well.
I mean, I do think it's like it is interesting to me that kind of one of the things that Doreen I think says is it Doreen or Dorian? How is it pronounced?
I'm not sure. I don't remember. I just read it as
Yeah,
Dorian.
Dorian.
We need to talk about further later on.
Oh
But
yeah,
yeah.
I know. I saw I was like I saw one letterbox review and I was like, what? Huh? I hope Fabiola did research on that.
Yes. Yes. I've known about that for a while. Because like it's like randomly referenced like in on random Twitter accounts and such over the years. But yeah,
um
anyways.
we'll tease it so people have to keep listening to this episode so they'll if they don't know they'll have to or if they do know they'll guess and be excited to know that they're right. But I there was a, there she talks about like how these categories in some way, it's like, oh, it's these categories ways for people to express themselves, but also if they become these really strict categories, the judges expect like exact interpretation, I think, are her words of, and there's this clip that we see of like the men's fashion,
Yeah.
and it's this big moment where he's like the model's like wearing this big like fur fancy coat, and then they're like, oh, that's a woman's coat, and then it becomes this big moment of being
It's
like,
a
no,
woman's garment. The buttons are on the right.
yeah.
Which
And
also kind of segues into the notion of the houses and ballroom itself being like a highly competitive but also like very safe version of gang warfare. Like
yeah.
I thought the description of the houses as being queer gangs really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it's interesting that it's like, it's this kind of like contradictory space where it's like, for the most part, it's really like, this is a place where people can be themselves, but there's also still rules and expectations, and there's
It's
this,
still a competition.
yeah, and there's systems that they have to fit within. And I don't know, there's something like kind of lovely from the perspective of, I think, modern discourse about queer culture, where it's like, in some ways, it's comforting to me the fact that, like, no one's ever gotten completely along with each other. Like, everyone's kind of always fighting about petty little things that, like, shouldn't be that huge of a deal, but then become a big deal because you're like in this space where you're like, oh, at least we're all like, it's like, oh, we're all queer here, we're all, we're all kind of on the same page, so we can find reasons to hate each other that aren't just bigotry. It's like being petty
Yeah.
and throwing, I mean, that's the whole thing
Shade
about
and reading.
reading. And yeah,
They like specifically say that the coat situation was shade.
yeah. And it's like, I don't know, I find that just, it's just oddly affirming to be like, oh yeah,
It's also very human because like
exactly.
the notion of ballroom and queer cultures being like community and like it's always community. It feels kind of dehumanizing and flattening.
Yeah. And it's like, no, these are people. And people, like, it's basically kind of like anti model minority in some ways.
Yeah, which is like also interesting in relation to the categories and how a lot of like they're kind of defying the model minority myth, but they're also kind of aspiring to it and
Yeah,
like
and
through
replicating it.
aestheticism.
Yeah. That's, and I think that's also part of the thing that I guess, the point to say that, oh, these like rigid rules and exact interpretations being the expectation can be, there's a little bit of danger to that.
Yeah.
Also, to speak on this being a documentary, it's really important to consider the fact that we are seeing all the things that we are seeing, we're seeing them through the eyes of the documentarians. What is included and what is shown to us, like, yes, we are seeing this culture, but it is also the parts that they decided to include and share us and that they found interesting.
Yeah.
This was not a film that was made by the ballroom performers themselves. This was a film that was made by an outsider. And we are also outsiders
Yeah.
commentating on that. But I think, like, that's just, to me, how I try to be, when I try to be like an educated and critical like audience member and observer of pieces of media. I'm like, I know that it's going to be biased and from a certain perspective, and I'm going to have my certain perspective then watching that. And to me, as someone who does in some way make media that is somewhat documentary, like somewhat of a documentary, like I my opinion, which of course is, like, not the word, but I personally much more prefer documentaries that have, include in some way or show the awareness of the bias of the filmmaker in their approach. I am much more likely to enjoy a documentary where I can see or hear the interviewer asking the questions, because it's like, yeah, it like makes us aware in small ways, maybe not even intentionally, that there could be a bias in the creating of the film. And this film doesn't really have that.
Yeah. It definitely feels more of like an anthropological historical document.
Yeah. But that's like I feel like using the term anthropological like study, that like I feel like people have this assumption that like, oh, anthropologists are like impartial observers. That's the word.
Yeah.
But it's like, no,
Yeah.
all scientists are also human, as we were
Yeah.
saying. Like they have their flaws.
Yeah. The other main source that I have is a piece on Vanity Fair by Chaos and Collins titled Paris is Burning is Back, and so is its baggage. So
mm,
it's kind of a lot about like taking in the different controversies kind of, but like covering the history of its contention and also like taking account Jenny's voice, but also like the criticism of it as well.
oh, okay. When did the criticism start? I guess as soon as it came out.
Kind of. Yeah, because like once it came out and got really successful, a lot of the subjects were like, where's the pay
Yeah.
from the revenue?
Did they make any money?
It says that they got about 55,000 split among them.
Like from the beginning?
Like
Like was
from
it like
after there was a whole dispute about the earnings.
okay.
Yeah.
So they had to basically dispute it and then they got paid.
Yeah.
They weren't paid from yeah.
And from Jenny's perspective, she says there was no convincing the queens to participate in the movie. People really wanted to talk about their lives. They were interested in the fact that I was interested.
Mm. I mean, of course they were interested in
Yeah.
being filmed. So all of them are talking pretty much about wanting to be famous and being to be recognized. Like, but
Like, yeah,
that's just
everything in
being
this film is important to document and to show, but it was also important to compensate them for their
yeah.
work as
Cuz
well.
like how do you film someone being like, "Oh yeah, we have to steal like
Yeah.
we're homeless, like we are barely scraping by," and be like, "This is such an interesting story to tell."
Yeah.
And just turn around and like not give them anything? Like
Yeah.
you can't just have, because also it's not like they're selling products that like bringing awareness to them like is gonna then like audience members are gonna go seek out to increase their revenue. No, they're living their lives, and the way you would support them is by compensating them for their appearance. Like
Yeah. And
yeah.
it also, the piece also addresses the idea that the film is quote unquote for white people.
Mm.
And they say the sense that this was a production by white people for white people, that's not historical, Jenny said. That is a production rather than a truth. You have to see Paris is Burning in the context of nonfiction. She held a similar stance in 1993, telling the Times that if they, i.e., the Black and brown queer people of the ballroom community, wanted to make a film about themselves, they would not be able, meaning that no one would fund their work. This is
Wait.
largely true, but there are also notable exceptions to Livingston's position. Marlon Riggs, for example, was a
Yeah.
Black queer experimental documentarian who'd made multiple films about race, AIDS, and queerness by the time Paris is Burning was released.
Yeah, I'm really confused by that statement. What? She's like, well, no one else was gonna make their film for them. What?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
I
like
was like,
further
Marlon Riggs is
credit
right.
it. Yeah. Yeah, the piece further goes Livingston's whiteness, she freely admits, helped her get the film made, even as her gender provided to prove to be a barely surmountable hindrance in the very male world of the film industry. The conversation about who profited from Paris wrestles directly with her relative privilege, even as, in Livingston's eyes, it misunderstands the real phenomenon at play. When you look at class in America, she said, middle class people tend to stay middle class. Working class people tend to stay working class. underclass people tend to stay underclass, and rich people tend to stay rich. That was not a condition that Paris is Burning created. In other words, she didn't get rich off the movie, but wound up with the same advantages she already had.
I mean, I feel like that we can see that, like, from because most of the film seems to take place in 1987, and then at the end it's 1989 or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
What exactly? Because I was about like what? Because we like okay, so there's is it Willy Ninja?
Yeah.
He basically like talks at the beginning about really wanting to go to Japan and really like wanting to travel the world. And then he's like interviewed again and he has and like he's had success. So I was gonna in my mind I was like, oh, that's probably because he was interviewed for the film. And then I was like, wait, no, because this is still within the film.
Yeah, like not necessarily.
So, like, what was it just like I guess I'm like
as we said before, a lot of it is just luck.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's like I mean, I do think it's fair to point out it's like one documentary isn't going to change the entire social structure to better support the people who were struggling in the current system. And I also think I think the success of Paris is Burning, it was like, oh, there was a critical and commercial, I think, success for the film after it came out. It's like, well, then did people with power then go, oh, we should fund more films like this? I mean, do you know if that was a change that happened?
I mean, it doesn't seem like it was a pretty significant change. Like, even though this was the era of new queer cinema, it was the era of new queer cinema because they had to find a way to get their stories out.
Yeah.
And it was mainly indie filmmaking.
Yeah. You know, maybe this film and the responses people are still having to it are maybe it's an example of like how a film can affect personal change versus like structural change. Because I do feel like I said at the top, like I know people who were like my life, like I was inspired and my life was changed by watching this one film. And I maybe it's sometimes I guess I'm like I get kind of stuck feeling frustrated that it's like why wasn't there like why wasn't there more of a systemic change from a piece of like after a piece of media came out, like if this was so influential to individual people, why wasn't there like a change we could see in the system? And
yeah, and I feel like that's one of the aspects that makes this film really notable and talked about.
Yeah,
because like part of the conversation is this is one of the best documentaries ever, and yet the situation hasn't changed much.
Yeah, like life changed because life changes, like it's and that's like I guess that's something like to I guess I just have to come to terms with still myself of like, oh, if this has a significant change to someone emotionally, you know, to them coming to terms with their identity or to just like their creative career, like can that just be enough that we hold that without but also still wishing for more, but also not being like frustrated and overwhelmed that one piece of media can't change the whole system. I don't know. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but
I feel like it's effective on like a personal level. Like going back to the Spring Awakening conversation, it is a very formative and influential piece of media to me and to my work. Like as we've talked about, like film doesn't, it's not a reflection of who you are, like your entire media consumption, but sometimes there are works that like you can go and be like show someone and go, if you want to know who I am and what I like in art and the kind of art I want to make, this is it, and Spring Awakening is one of those pieces.
Yeah. I also think, I mean, probably to me the quote from this film that makes me the most emotional and is relevant to this conversation is the one towards the end about oh god, I didn't write it down. Do you know what I'm referring to? Where it's like basically like if you didn't.
It was a Dorian.
Yeah, the
quote.
Dorian quote.
Her quotes are really good in
Yeah.
this.
Let me
It
find
must be in someone's Letterboxd review.
I know. I also
I know which one you're talking about, but I don't have the exact words.
I'm also just thinking of Katya and Trixie quoting it too, because I know that they've quoted it before. Just
well, like the final line,
yeah,
that the final line is really iconic. If you shoot an arrow and it goes real high, hooray for you.
But there is also something to like basically, oh yeah, I found someone who said it like, you've made a mark on the world if you just get through it.
Yeah.
Like just, okay, like if you get famous, if you have this big thing, like that's great. But simply surviving is enough of an accomplishment, kind of.
And that's kind of what Crystal did. Like with her big iconic moment in The Queen, she created this house system, and even though it very much arises from marginalization, it's still a step forward and a step in community and community helping each other. Yeah, one of the sections of the Vanity Fair piece that I highlighted was, it's to the film's credit and to the credit of the queens who, despite any misgivings after the fact, gave so much of themselves in Paris, that the film itself already seems to grapple with much of this tension. The realities the queens and their supporters continually talk about, their homelessness, their inability to have lifestyles promised by shows like Dynasty, are also the realities at the heart of the documentary's making. In so many ways, this is a story about the privileges of identity and the ways that those excluded from those privileges have found to question and subvert them.
That's a good point. I mean, it's I feel like this is a film that's classically camp in a way that I think we're constantly bucking, like grappling with in our show, where it's like you have to discuss it to get to the meaning, and like the meaning itself and like all the layers aren't discussed in the in the piece. You have to discuss them,
but like it's also very much kind of quote unquote surface level camp in the sense that it is about drag performance and voguing and ballroom, which is all very like performance oriented and very much geared toward like listening to marginalized groups and their art and their forms of expression, which are mainly through like aestheticism and fashion and performance. Also, that one shot of the dog with the pearl necklace.
Oh my god,
I love it.
With
the commentator saying opulence.
O-P. See, now I can't do it because I'm horrible at spelling. I'm like, how do you spell opulence? But yeah, amazing. I actually do know someone. It was a friend of a friend who, and the friend has now moved. So, but I know someone who had a dog who had competed in multiple dog drag shows.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Where they like the owner would make like would make costumes that like had like padding and stuff, and they would have multiple layers so they could do like costume reveals like for this jog just to like parade around, and they would like do a whole show. That's another kind of camp right there.
Yeah. Like, speaking of, like, what was your favorite category?
Oh, there's lots of really good. I don't know which category it was. And now I'm like, wait, who which one of the stars was it, but who, and maybe it was like a like pretty girl category, where I think it was, I just remember like one of the girls like basically like, getting up on like a chair and like standing in front of
That
like a
was
fan.
Saint Laurent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, and it was like you know, and being like, oh, like, you know, a woman, maybe a woman wouldn't be all acting out like this, but this is how I am a woman, or something along those lines. Was like, that was a moment that really stuck in my head. I think the sequence that is, I think the best edited, because for all of my like kind of frustrations of how this functions as a documentary, I do think this is a really well edited film. I really like all of the different
And
title
well
cards.
shot.
Well
It looks
shot.
beautiful.
Yeah, and also like it feels in some ways, I've like, I saw like people like referring to it as like feeling like almost like kind of like montage of different things. It's like all of, it's more thematically like more of a thematic flow than like a kind of a exact plot. It feels very like poetic to me, kind of, where it's like, oh, this one idea and then this one idea, and like you get these really bold title cards for each like introduction of a person or like idea.
And a perfect final line.
Yeah. But I think the towards the end, where it's before it like cuts to 1989, where it's the sequence where it's cutting between Venus and Octavia,
Yeah.
where they're just talking about how much, you know, they're basically both saying the same thing of how they want to be happy, they want to be successful, they want like a house and a husband and fame, and you know, be a star. It was just like,
and also like general stability.
yeah, and that's the thing that I think like is what's so emotional about that. I mean, and knowing the context that like, you know, Venus was killed. But it's really like,
and it's like covered immediately after that,
it's
where they do like the reveal.
Yeah, it's just really, it's quite emotional that the thing that is so aspirational is just basically like you said, stability, and just looking for, they just want to be happy and be okay.
And that's why they value the ballroom so much, because it's the space of community and having fun.
Yeah. And like, and how in this one moment they can come and it's like they can have what they might not have in everyday life.
Yeah.
And I'm as free as the wind that's blowing out on this beach.
Except that voice is still there. As free as this beach.
I am what I am. I am my own special creation. OPULENCE. Opulence. You own everything. Everything is yours.
I always had hopes of being a big star. Then I look, as you get older, you aim a little lower. And you say, well, yeah, you still might make an impression. Everybody wants to leave something behind them, some impression, some mark upon the world. And then you think, you left a mark on the world if you just get through it. And a few people remember your name. Then you left a mark. You don't have to bend the whole world. I think it's better to just enjoy it. Pay your dues and enjoy it. If you shoot an arrow and it goes real high, hooray for you.
And so it's a performance, but it's also real.
Yeah.
Especially for the women like Venus, who are trans women. And but it's like, yeah, I mean, there's just that cruelty to the world where it's still, I mean, God, things aren't getting better. Like,
Yeah. Which
and
relates to the whole one important piece of media isn't necessarily going to change the world. But yeah, the Venus parts are devastating.
Yeah.
Especially after the shot of her in the sunset with the
Yeah.
boombox. That's one of my favorite shots of the movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really, like, I feel like there's so many images that are captured that feel so poignant because of the context of as time has passed. And that's definitely that shot with the boombox and the sunset and Venus just is definitely top of that list.
Yeah. And before we head out and get too bummed out,
Yeah.
the thing that we teased
Yes.
at the beginning, the mummy. The
The
mummy in
mummy
the trunk.
that they never identified who the fuck it was.
So basically, Dorian, who a lot of the film is just filmed getting her makeup done in what we presume is her room.
Yeah.
I think apparently in that same room or same area, she had this trunk full of clothes that also had a mummified body that had been mummified for about 25 years.
Yeah, and like, so not mummified by, like, you know, some special preservation, right? It was like,
yeah,
it had basically just been like air dried, kind of like naturally mummified. And it was discovered after,
like, after
like,
she
she
died.
passed and her friends just found it.
Yeah. And like, there's a lot of debate as to like what happened, because like apparently the body had a note to it that said like, this man tried to rob me. But there's also like some rumors that like it was a result of like self-defense after an altercation regarding her affirmation surgery. So yeah, it's very nebulous, the whole context of it. But it's very camp that like one of the sagest voices in this documentary also had a body in that room for like 25 years, and she's just talking to this documentarian. And every time they cut to her, I'm like, where exactly is this body? Because I had known about the body thing for a while before watching this movie.
God. It's truly like, what a character. It really adds a different context to being like, oh, what did you get up to? But hey, I trust. I mean, she already, like, we don't know. We don't really know what happened. So I'm gonna trust it wasn't self-defense, you know?
Also, it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's just like such a one of the most fun facts ever. Like, hey, there might be a dead body somewhere in one of these shots. And the person who said, if you shoot an arrow and it goes real high, hooray for you, has killed someone.
Yeah. Well,
it's just wild that she kept it for decades. And also just like this documentary crew.
Like, did she, like, was she burning a lot of incense? Like, what? How did it not smell? Like,
no.
What? Can I ask something kind of, maybe this is a stupid question, but I was confused. And I should have maybe asked this at the top, but here at the end, why is the film called Paris is Burning? Was that
'Cause
the
I
name
think
of...
one of the ballrooms is called Paris is Burning.
Okay. Because I guess there's like one image we
They're
see,
like very
maybe?
briefly made a reference to
Yeah.
it.
But there also seemed to be like one of the like performers was named Paris. So I was
And
like,
there's
what?
also a moment where one of them is talking about like traveling the world and like actually going to Paris and making it
Yeah.
burn.
Yeah. In some ways, at least this film and the recognition that it is still getting to this day is a way for these queens to be recognized and to have that success. And I I think that's definitely complicated and contentious in terms of like compensation went, but holding their images in our minds and our hearts, especially the ones who passed, I think in some ways it's really in many ways it's really beautiful and special that this film was made.
Yeah, to me, like, this is one of the classically camp films of it's very complicated and layered
Mm-hmm.
and worthy of discussion, but it's also really pretty and really quotable and really
Yeah.
fun. There's so many quotes here.
Yeah.
You look like an overgrown orangutan.
Yeah. It's a woman's coat. It's a man's coat. No. The
It's a
buttons
woman's
are on
garment.
the right side.
Just the phrase, a woman's garment.
Yeah.
Category is going to school. Does she look like a girl going to school?
I would love to Vogue. I know I don't know how or where. There's not really, but I don't know what the spaces are for me in Seattle to do that. But
It looks
goddamn,
really hard.
oh, it looks so much fun. Oh,
Like, it's so fun to look at and to just watch the performers, but I can imagine that doing it is really hard
yeah,
because
yeah,
like as they mentioned, like it's breakdance inspired, but it's also modeling poses, and
yeah,
also some of it is like you have to evade your competitor,
yeah.
so like you have to like move around them but never touch them,
Yep,
which seems hard.
yeah. Maybe I'll see if there's actually. You know what? I think I watched a documentary that there is a place here in the city that does teach voguing. I'm gonna go and try to do research on that. That's what I'm doing after watching this film, is seeing if I could go take more dance classes.
I'm gonna watch ballroom videos
Hell yeah.
and listen to Renaissance.
Tell us in the comments, dear listener, how are you finding the ballroom in your life?
Did you shoot an arrow and did it go real high? And was it hooray for you?
Was it hooray for you? I have been your co-host, Saffron Hefta-Gaub. You can follow me online everywhere at Gaub Hefta.
And I've been your other co-host, Fabiola. You can find me on Instagram at Fabi0LAHH and on Twitter at Fabiola_Liaño.
Our theme song that you're bobbing your head to right now is by Harrison Lurie.
Give us a rating on Spotify and a review on Apple.
Thank you to our patrons, Nicole Veneto, Jose Liano, and Pericles Sparrow. Please check our episode description for additional links and citations.
Thank you so much.